Allies, fire! Target down! Secure the gates! Watch your flank!
She threatened to have my daughter arrested for trespassing on our own dock. 3 days later, I handed her an eviction notice for the estate she'd called home for 12 years. It's 5:30 a.m. in northern Idaho. A thick, silver mist is clinging to the surface of Spirit Lake, making everything feel hushed and heavy. My 10-year-old daughter, Maya, is standing next to me on our pier, white-knuckling her spinning rod. She's vibrating with a mix of confusion and pure adrenaline. In the distance, the low rumble of a county cruiser's tires on our gravel driveway breaks the silence. And there she is, Evelyn Thorne, 62 years old, sporting a platinum bob and dressed head to toe in designer athleisure. She's standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, pointing a manicured finger at us like we're some kind of public health hazard. All because we dared to cast a line at sunrise. What Evelyn didn't realize was that she'd spent the last 9 years playing dictator of the woods, running a completely fraudulent HOA and shaking down her neighbors for over $40,000 in dues. But more importantly, she didn't know that I now held the deed to the very ground beneath her feet. Before we dive into how I dismantled her entire world, drop a comment below. What would you do if a neighbor called the cops on your kid for just being a kid? And let me know where you're watching from. I'm willing to bet a good portion of you are currently dealing with a power-tripping HOA board member right now. The new start. Let's rewind 6 months. My name is Elias Vance. I'm 45, and for 20 years I worked as a senior industrial land surveyor before selling my firm and opting for a slower pace of life. I'd just gone through a divorce, civil, no drama, just 2 people who grew apart, and we shared custody of Maya. I moved to Spirit Lake looking for a fresh start. It's a tiny town, maybe 4,000 people, where everyone knows your business but usually keeps to themselves. I bought a 1980s cedar siding cabin on North Shore Drive for $380,000. It was a bit weathered, but it came with 150 feet of private shoreline. When I first walked through the house, it smelled like wood smoke and old cedar. But when I stepped out onto that back deck and saw the sun hitting the water, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Here's the thing about me. My grandfather was a title attorney in Chicago. He spent my childhood teaching me that the world isn't run by people, it's run by paper. I built my career on finding the invisible lines, the easements, the encroachments, and the forgotten boundaries that most people ignore. I bought this place in a bit of a post-divorce haze. The agent, a local guy named Miller, mentioned some neighborhood traditions, but I didn't think twice about it. How complicated could a lakeside road be? Maya took to the lake instantly. It was the one thing that made the transition between 2 houses easier for her. I spent my first month doing the heavy lifting, replacing rotted pier boards and sealing the deck. I can still remember the smell of that wood stain and the ache in my lower back. It was honest, satisfying work. Then I met Evelyn Thorne. She's the self-styled director of the Spirit Lake Preservation Society. Her husband, Gerald, owns the largest hardware chain in the county. They are the definition of local royalty, Rotary Club, Country Club, and friends with every township official. Their house is a massive, modern craftsman build, probably worth $1.2 million, dominating the shoreline. Evelyn drives a black Range Rover with the plate Lake Pro. 2 weeks in, I'm working on my dock when I hear the sharp clack-clack-clack of designer sandals on wood. "You'll need to submit your shoreline maintenance plan to the board for approval," she says, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We maintain strict aesthetic standards to protect the collective equity of the shore." I was confused. The board, I own this shoreline and the lake is public water. She handed me a thick, laminated packet, a $600 annual preservation fee. Rules about what color umbrellas I could have, boat engine limits, even restrictions on when I could have guests. I handed it back. I'm not interested. I own my land to the high water mark. Her smile didn't just fade, it turned into a mask of ice. The smell of her perfume, something like heavy lilies and laundry starch, was cloying in the lake air. "Everyone who belongs here participates, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "It would be a shame to start your new life as an outsider." I did some digging that night. I searched for Spirit Lake HOA in the county database. Nothing. I called Miller, my realtor. He just laughed nervously. "Oh, that's just Evelyn's group. Most people pay the few $100 just to keep her from complaining to the building inspector every week." My gut told me something was rotten, but I wanted a quiet life for Maya. I tucked away the original survey I'd found in the basement, a dusty map with faded ink, and decided to stay under the radar. But a week later, my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sweet woman who's lived there since the '60s, brought over a pie. She leaned in close, her eyes darting toward Evelyn's mansion. "Just a warning, Elias. Evelyn doesn't like being told no." My late husband tried to fight her on the dock fees, and suddenly the township was at our door every week for noise violations that didn't exist. I thanked her, but I didn't realize how prophetic she was. The conflict escalates. 3 weeks later, it's a Saturday just after 7 a.m. The air is crisp, that first bite of autumn. I'm on the dock with Maya, teaching her how to cast a lure without catching her own ear. The lake is glass. You could hear a pin drop. Then the clack-clack returns. Evelyn is marching down the path in a designer tracksuit. "Activity is restricted until 9 a.m., she barks. "You're disturbing the peace of the cove." I looked at her deadpan. "Evelyn, we're just fishing. We aren't even talking." She pulled out her phone and started recording us. The digital shutter clicks sounded like gunshots in the quiet. "I'm documenting your refusal to comply with community bylaws. You're harassing the local waterfowl." She then produced a covenant of residence card, claiming the whole block was bound by it since the 1980s. I told her I never signed a thing. She snapped back, "It's a running covenant. It stays with the land. Check your title if you can even read one." Here's a tip for everyone. A covenant is only as good as the county's stamp. If it isn't recorded at the courthouse, it's just a piece of paper with a fancy font. Monday morning, I went to the recorder of deeds. The office was quiet, smelling of old paper and industrial cleaner. The clerk, a guy named Pete, helped me pull the files for North Shore Drive. Result: 0. No HOA, no restrictive covenants since 1982. And those had a 20-year sunset clause that expired decades ago. There was nothing. I wrote Evelyn a formal letter. I kept it professional. "According to county records, your organization has no legal authority. Please cease all contact regarding fees or rules." I dropped it in her mailbox myself. 2 days later, Gerald Thorne, the husband, shows up. It's dusk, and the bugs are swarming the porch light. Gerald has that good old boy charm, but his eyes are as cold as the lake in winter. "Elias, let's be neighbors here," he says, leaning against my railing. "The fee is a drop in the bucket. It keeps the riffraff out. If you don't play ball, the township might start looking real close at that unpermitted roof work you did." My blood turned to ice. "Are you threatening me, Gerald?" "Just giving you a heads up. People around here look out for each other. You don't want to be the one nobody looks out for." The next morning, a township truck was in my driveway. The inspector was a guy I'd never seen before. He spent an hour looking for structural violations on my deck. He didn't find any, but he looked annoyed that he had to be there. "Just doing my job, sir. We get calls." That's when it clicked. Evelyn and Gerald weren't just neighbors. They were the local government. They used the bureaucracy like a weapon. I started a log. Every time she filmed us, every time a mysterious inspector showed up, every anonymous note left on my windshield. Most people would have folded, but I'm a surveyor. I deal in cold, hard facts. A week later, the social pressure started. Mrs. Gable stopped bringing pie. Other neighbors looked away when I drove by. Then Maya came home crying. Her best friend from the local school had uninvited her from a birthday party. The mother told Maya that it's better if our families don't mix right now. Evelyn was poisoning the well. I started talking to the other neighbors in private. I found out 5 families had been paying her dues for nearly a decade. That's thousands of dollars vanishing into Evelyn's pocket. One guy, a local mechanic, tried to stop paying, and suddenly the town wouldn't renew his business license. This wasn't an HOA, it was a protection racket. I contacted the state's attorney's office. They were interested but told me that without a massive paper trail or a formal corporate entity to sue, it was a he said, she said civil matter. So I decided to go to the source. Evelyn held her committee meetings in her dining room. I walked in uninvited on a Wednesday night. The room was opulent, velvet chairs, a chandelier that cost more than my truck, and the overwhelming scent of vanilla candles. 6 neighbors sat there, looking like they were at a funeral. "I'd like to see the tax ID and the financial ledger for this organization," I said. The room went silent. Evelyn's face turned a shade of purple I've only seen in sunsets. "This is a private meeting for members. You're trespassing. Leave or I'll call the sheriff." "The invite said all residents of North Shore," I replied. "I'm a resident. Where is the money going, Evelyn?" She called the cops. A young deputy named Miller, different from the realtor, showed up. He looked embarrassed. He told me, "Sir, the Thorns are big supporters of the department. Just go home. Don't make this harder on yourself." I left, but I didn't go home. I went to the library. I spent the next 48 hours buried in historical property records. I tracked the original subdivision developer, a company called Northwood Development that went belly up in the early 90s. And that's when I found it, a tiny, overlooked detail in a bankruptcy filing from 30 years ago. When Northwood Development went under, their assets were auctioned off. Most people bought the lots, but the residual assets, the private access roads, the common areas, and the management rights to the entire subdivision, were bought by a shell company that had been dormant for 3 decades. I tracked the owner of that shell company. It was my father. He had bought those rights as a speculative investment in the 90s and forgotten about them. When he died, they passed to me in a box of worthless deeds I'd never bothered to verify. I didn't just own my house. I owned the road Evelyn used to get to her driveway. I owned the land under her private pier. I owned the rights to every common area she'd been managing. I called an old colleague who specializes in forensic titles. "Check the auction records from 1994, I told her. "Tell me I'm not dreaming." She called me back 4 hours later. "Elias, you don't just own the road. You are the developer. You have the legal right to dissolve the committee, gate the road, or, and this is the fun part, charge a lease for any encroachment on developer-owned land." I looked out my window at Evelyn's house. I wasn't going to just win. I was going to take the ground from under her feet. Back to Saturday morning, 6:30 a.m. Evelyn is screaming about the sheriff again. She's shouting about how people like us don't belong here. She thinks she has the power. She thinks the sheriff is her personal security. She has no idea that in my back pocket, I have a cease and desist order for her entire driveway. Sheriff Braddock pulls up looking exhausted. He looks at me, then at Evelyn. "What now, Evelyn?" "He's on the common shore. Arrest him," she shrieks. I stepped forward and handed the sheriff a folder. "Actually, Sheriff, I'm not on common ground. I'm on my ground. And as it turns out, so is Mrs. Thorne's house. At least the front 20 feet of it." The look on Evelyn's face was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. But the real kicker, I wasn't just there to talk about the land. I was there to talk about the 12 years of back rent she owed the developer for using a road she didn't own. That night, as the shadows of the oaks lengthened across the pasture, I sat with Alina, the weight of the forged document still heavy in my mind. She looked at those dormant bulbs in the dark soil, her eyes reflecting a quiet strength. "She's been stealing from everyone, Miller," she whispered, her finger tracing the timeline of deceit I'd uncovered. For 15 years, this wasn't just about a shortcut. It was a systematic harvest of a community's trust. I looked at the garden that would bloom long after this war was over and made a promise. Now, we finish this. The conspiracy was far more deep-rooted than I'd imagined. The documents Mark Sterling handed over told a story of fraud stretching back nearly 2 decades. In 1990, the original water easement across my ranch and 3 others had expired. The county had sent certified notices requiring renewals, compensation, and fresh legal filings, standard procedure for infrastructure on private land. The HOA never responded. Not once. From 1991 to 2005, they operated the entire system illegally, betting on small-town bureaucracy to overlook the gap. They were right. Then Victoria Sterling took the helm. With her banking background, she spotted the vulnerability during an audit and realized the whole subdivision was at risk if we ever realized the truth. Instead of fixing it legally, she chose the path of a criminal. Mark had copies of it all, forged easements backdated to the late 80s with signatures from neighbors who had been dead for 10 years. There were notary stamps from officials who had never seen the paperwork, and a county seal that hadn't even been designed when the documents were supposedly signed. "This is amateur hour," Silas told me over the phone. "Digital printing on paper that's supposed to be 30 years old. A notary who died in '95 appearing on a '98 document. Any federal investigator will dismantle this in minutes." But it was a goldmine of a crime. Victoria had done this to 4 properties, representing over $600,000 in stolen rights. "Miller, we're talking federal mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. She's looking at real time." The power dynamic shifted instantly. For months, I'd been playing defense, feeling like an underdog against a superior force. But I wasn't fighting a giant. I was fighting a con artist who had been running a 15-year bluff. She believed her own lies because they'd gone unchallenged for so long. She thought she was untouchable. That was her weakness. I spread the evidence across my table with the same precision I used to map out hydraulic failures on a destroyer. Every signature and date told a story. Alina joined me, her mind still sharp despite the exhaustion. 200 families paying for stolen access, she noted. How much has she pocketed? I did the math. $1.9 million in fraudulent infrastructure fees over 15 years. This was justice for the whole valley now. My strategy crystallized. Document the fraud, coordinate with the authorities, and set a trap so undeniable she couldn't wiggle out of it. Because I knew Victoria, when she felt her empire crumbling, she'd make a desperate move. I wanted to be ready. I called a security firm in Nashville that handled high-risk infrastructure. "I need hydraulic bollards that can stop an SUV at 20 mph, I told them. "I want them disabled, but I want it legal. I need the documentation to prove she was warned." The system was a masterpiece of engineering. 2 steel bollards, 6 inches thick, powered by 3,000 psi hydraulic pressure, the same principles used in aircraft carrier catapults. A small pump generating enough force to stop a tank. Technical insight. Hydraulic systems use compressed fluid to create massive mechanical advantage. When these posts rise, they are immovable objects. If a vehicle hits them, the vehicle loses. Every time. The sensors were just as advanced. Pressure plates calibrated for heavy vehicles and motion-activated 4K cameras with encrypted cloud storage. Total cost, $14,000. It was a steep price, but it was less than the damage she'd already done. Silas connected me with a federal prosecutor, Chloe Vance, no relation, who specialized in white-collar racketeering. She reviewed the forgeries and was floored. "This is the cleanest case of document fraud I've seen. Federal agents love a layup like this." I filed the reports with the sheriff, the DA, and the FBI, timed perfectly for the HOA's annual infrastructure inspection on April 15th. I systematically gathered my allies, the dairy farmer, the orchard owner, and the local veterans group. Even the editor of the local paper was in the loop. I installed the bollards on a Tuesday, with all permits filed and authorized access-only signs clearly posted. The posts were invisible when retracted, just 2 silver discs flush with the gravel, but my laptop showed them armed and ready. Alina and I tested the system that evening. At low speeds, nothing happened, but the moment a vehicle crossed the threshold too fast, the warning lights flashed and the steel rose. "It's a trap for someone who's been stealing for a long time," Alina observed. I sent Victoria one final certified letter. "Use public roads. Private property is now protected by active security." She signed for it Thursday. By Friday, she was on social media screaming about veteran extremism and hostage-taking. She was escalating just as I'd predicted. She even organized a convoy for community rights. 15 cars planned to storm my ranch during the Monday inspection. Monday morning broke with a chilling clarity. Victoria's convoy assembled at 9:00 a.m. A line of SUVs led by her silver Mercedes. She'd even hired a security consultant, a guy in tactical gear who looked like a weekend warrior. She was live-streaming the whole thing, telling her followers that community rights supersede selfish individuals. What she didn't know was that 3 unmarked federal sedans were tucked into the line of cars behind her. FBI agents were literally witnessing the conspiracy in real time. At 10:45 a.m., Victoria accelerated through my gate at 15 mph. My sensors triggered. The mechanical clang of the bollards echoed through the trees as 3,000 psi of Tennessee justice met her undercarriage. The impact was bone-jarring. Her Mercedes didn't just stop, it folded. The oil pan shattered, the radiator exploded in a cloud of steam, and the transmission case cracked wide open. She was pinned, blocked by the steel in front and her own panicked convoy behind. Her horn blared a continuous, dying note. Agent Vance stepped out of her car and approached the smoking wreck with a warrant in hand. "Victoria Sterling, you're under arrest for federal mail fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." The live stream was still running, broadcasting her screaming at the agents as they pulled her from the car. Her security consultant tried to run through the woods, but was tackled by a deputy right in the middle of Alina's blooming wildflowers. By noon, the dictator was in handcuffs, and the community crisis was over.